Henry, thanks for joining us behind the baseline with Better. It's a chance to get to know the individual behind the tennis player. And I'd love to start by asking, why is raising awareness around mental health important to you?
Oh, it's incredibly important to me. I think as a man and you know, growing up as a boy, I went through countless of my own mental health struggles at various times, particularly in my late teens. My father's also done a lot of work recently around research around, you know, boys and why they're kind of struggling in schools and kind of finding employment and all of those kinds of areas. And I really relate with that. And I really relate to how sport can be a really positive outlet and a really positive thing for maybe an otherwise negative experience and negative time for boys in particular, which I know, you know, this charity is inspired by the death of your brother. So it's, yeah, incredibly important and something I relate with, and yeah, so it's a pleasure for me to be supporting and representing Better.
Well, it means the world to us, and as you said, you know, we lost my brother when he was 18, and I was 27 when we lost him. And really, for me personally, that was the first time I'd really come around and across mental health and suicide, because I'd maybe lived a sheltered life before that. What were the ages that you came across it? So
for me, it was those ages. So it was you know, I say 15 and 19. You know, I think the stat is, you know, 70% of kids in school, 70% of them are boys that are on education kind of health and care plans, and boys are 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide. And those are, I relate because those are the ages where I was really struggling, kind of going through puberty, lots of hormones, and yeah, I had a really difficult time kind of progressing from high school into college. That was my difficult period. Bit of depression in there, and you know, I actually ended up taking a year out of school. And yeah, so that was my first-hand experience of that. And yeah, the more I've spoken about it with different people, the more I realized that it wasn't an unusual thing. Lots of people go through similar things. It's just maybe not talked about enough. So yeah, I think the more we can raise awareness and have those kinds of conversations, the better everyone will be.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you do to look after your mental health?
Lots of things. So obviously there's kind of the performance side for me on the tennis court. You know, we're often in quite high stress situations on court, high pressure moments. So there's that whole world of sports psychology, but also as a tennis player, the thing that I struggle with most is spending time away from home, you know, away from my family, away from my girlfriend. Kind of, yeah, traveling around the world sounds great, but it also means that I don't get to spend so much time with those people. So it can be quite a lonely time. So yeah, I've worked with a therapist. I haven't done for a little while, but last year I was working with a therapist just to kind of help me manage those emotions and manage that time away. So yeah, now that's kind of where my focuses are, is like performance, but also making sure that I take care of myself and make sure that, yeah, as happy as I can be, you know, doing this job. Yeah.
Because if you're happy within yourself, then in your example, being on court makes it a little easier. Oh
yeah, massively. I think, you know, if you're miserable, you know, off the court, that's always going to translate onto the court and how you play and perform. And yeah, you know, tennis, you have to be really resilient. You have to come back from breaks down, and you know, some of our best matches and best performances have been examples of that. And a big part of that is, you know, I feel good off of the court, and maybe, you know, when I'm in a certain place and I'm not having such a good time, that can translate. I can get a bit negative on court. So yeah, it's really important for me to manage those feelings.
And it's normal, I guess. Well, you touched on therapy there as well. We've always said that you don't have to be anxious or depressed to start with therapy. You could be having money issues, family issues, anything could be going on. Have you found that?
Yeah, it wasn't that I was necessarily feeling, you know, especially down, or you know, that I was especially, you know, financially worried, as you know, for your example, but I just felt that something maybe wasn't quite right, and I also wanted to just explore that side. You know, it wasn't something that I'd done a lot of work on, you know. Like I said, I was aware that those things existed, but I hadn't actually taken the time to, you know, do my own research and speak to a professional about these feelings that I'm having. And yeah, it was honestly, it was one of the best things I've ever done. It was invaluable. It helped me understand, you know, these emotions and these feelings, and you know, kind of why they're happening, and also just how to deal with them as best as I can. You know, also sometimes you can't necessarily deal with them, but they're there, and you know, they will probably pass, and there's nothing you can do about that. So, oh yeah, just invaluable for me to dive into that.
I love that, because as you've talked before, all the work that we do as a charity, all that money that comes in, goes out in free access to therapy. So we've got better therapy vouchers, and they provide 6 free sessions. And it's giving people the chance to come to one place and get free sessions. Therefore, you aren't having to try and find a therapist. The cost is not an issue, and the barriers of entry of waiting times are no longer there. So it's amazing to hear that you found it so useful.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that. So the reason, well, one of the big reasons I did it was, you know, I'm lucky enough to be in a position that ATP have their own program for that. So they offered me 6 free sessions, I think it was. So, I mean, it's a perfect example of how kind of lowering, even for me, lowering those barriers to entry, and just, and you know, it's there on a plate. You know, why on earth would you not go and do that? So, yeah, that's fantastic.
That's cool. And what does self-care outside of tennis look like for you?
Oof, good question. I think lots of things. I think, you know, again, firstly, it's you know, kind of nutritional stuff. It's, you know, making sure I'm hydrated, and I think those all sound like kind of physical things, but also, you know, if I'm cooking or making sure I'm eating properly, mentally it helps me a lot. Obviously, performance-wise, it helps me a lot. So, yeah, taking care of those 2 things, I always find, you know, that generally puts me in a better mood if I'm eating well and keeping myself, you know, physically well. It's also just checking in with people, I think. You know, checking in with, I would say for me, it's my dad, my brother, and my girlfriend. Those are like my 3 kind of touchstones. If I'm ever, you know, kind of feeling a little bit panicky or yeah, down or emotional or nervous, those I would say are the 3 people that I would go to with those kinds of things. You know, I have to mention my mum, because she'll be upset,
Yeah.
you know, if I don't mention her. But I think, and she's absolutely amazing. But I think, like, for those kinds of problems, I think like it's nice to have people that you know that you can reach out to, and you've had those conversations with before, and yeah, just checking in with people and having conversations, I think, is the most important thing. I think, you know, it's when I isolate myself and take my way, you know, away, that's when it can get a little bit negative and down for me. So I think, yeah, talking to people, having conversations, and yeah, being honest about everything is really, really useful for me.
It's difficult sometimes. There's that fear of what are they going to think, or am I even able to say this aloud? But when you do, you're always met with support. People are always there for you.
100%. Yeah, I think, yeah, the first time is always the most difficult. And something that when I was seeing my therapist, is something that he said to me is, you know, definitely go and have those conversations. You know, I'm sure that he knew that I would be met with support, but yeah, before you do that, it's quite a scary thing to do. It really is. But again, as I mentioned, what you often find is that most people have gone through similar things and have felt similar things, and yeah, they're very happy to talk through those things with you. So yeah, that was a revelation for me, really. Yeah.
Nice. And what makes you happy?
Good question. Tennis makes me really happy.
That's good.
Yeah, specifically the game of tennis. When I'm playing tennis, you know, there's a lot of other stuff that goes into the job of tennis, but yeah, tennis and sport makes me really happy. And I think if I had to choose one thing throughout my life that's been a constant outlet and source of happiless for me, I guess, it would be sport and tennis. And I really mean that. And, you know, I started playing tennis when I was 4 or 5 years old, I would say, you know, being dropped off, you know, on a Saturday morning, as many kids do, just to play tennis. And somehow it's become this, you know, my career. I'm not sure quite how that happened, but it's stuck with me, you know, through, you know, my primary school, you know, my different friends, different interests, different studies, you know, different girls, pursuits, you know, whatever it is. Tennis has always been there for my whole life. So I feel, yeah, very lucky to have that as something that makes me feel happy and something that I get to do so often. So tennis makes me happy, and I think also, you know, my family really makes me happy. Those are the two things that are closest to my heart. Yeah.
I love that. And when you're having a bad day or going through a difficult time, whether that's professionally or personally, how do you deal with it?
Good question. You know, being honest with you, sometimes I don't deal with it in the best way. Sometimes I do retreat, and you know, especially for me, you know, maybe it's after a difficult loss, or you know, I've got travel coming up that I'm anxious about to a country. I will sit in my hotel room and you know, feel sad about myself, which I think, you know, in some ways, you know, it's maybe a good thing to process that, but also at some point you know, I have to get out of that. I have to come out of my shell and out of my cave of a hotel room and talk to people. So I think for me, it comes down to distracting myself with different activities, you know, just getting out there and doing something, you know, whether it's, you know, sports, so you know, playing, you know, paddle or golf or you know, whatever sport it might be. Or yeah, I'm fortunate enough to travel the world, so yeah, there's a good bit of sightseeing that's available to me. So maybe it's, you know, going and getting out of the hotel room and seeing some sights, or going to a restaurant that I've, you know, looked up, or you know, whatever it might be. But I think just keeping myself moving and getting outside and out and about, I think for me that helps the most. Even though again, it's quite a difficult thing to do when you're feeling down. And yeah, I think when I struggled as a teenager, I think I didn't quite know that, and it was difficult for me to get out of my room and get out of my bed and those kinds of things. Whereas now, you know, I know that that's a really important thing for me to do. So yeah, I try to do that. Yeah, when I can. Yeah.
Nice. And final question that we always ask everyone is, what advice would you give to your younger self about looking after your mental health?
I think I would say, you know, exactly what I've said, which is have conversations with people about it. And it's very easy to think that the problem that you have is extremely personal, and there's something wrong with you that other people cannot understand, and it's specifically, you know, there's something wrong with me. And again, having conversations with people, I think you'll very quickly find that these are normal things to be having, that everyone goes through at some point. And yeah, that would be my number one thing, is talk about it. Just you know, whether it's whoever it is, whether it's a friend or family or a therapist or whoever it is, I think talk about it, and you'll quickly feel better about the position you're in, and then that then puts you in a position to kind of try and feel better about it. And yeah, I wish I'd have known that, you know. Yeah, I wish I'd have known that. But yeah, that's the advice I would give to myself.
Sometimes it takes time, you know. It takes these conversations. It takes people hearing it from different sources to understand and have that perspective.
100%.
But talking is by far, the best. Well, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really appreciate the support.
Yeah, thank you.